Hello guys and gals, and welcome. So today we're going to go over another skill. This is a spirit gem skill. This one is called a Combat Frenzy. Combat Frenzies, it kind of got nerfed into oblivion a couple patches ago, and it's not really as good as it used to be. But let's go over it. We'll talk about what you could potentially use it for and why you would potentially use it. So Combat Frenzy is a buff that essentially gives you kind of like a free frenzy charge whenever you freeze, electrocute, pin an enemy. It's basically immobilization. So it has to actually immobilize the target, right? It says while active grants you a frenzy charge when you freeze, electrocute, or pin an enemy. This can only occur once every few seconds. And when it says once every few seconds, it's like once every 6 seconds. Now there is some quality that you can get from the Gemling Legionnaire buff, which is 1.3 seconds off of that delay, which would bring it down to 4.7 or something. 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah, so 4.7 seconds. So you can only get one frenzy charge every 4.7 seconds, but only when you freeze, electrocute, or pin an enemy, which isn't really as easy as it would seem. Now, when you're out in the wild and you're just killing like random trash mobs, you'll get a frenzy charge once every 4.7 seconds, and then that's cool. But then when you fight like a boss or an elite monster that's all by himself, well, you'll notice that you're not going to get frenzy charges at anywhere near the same efficiency as you would before. And this really just comes down to the fact that, well, you can only freeze a boss like once every certain number of seconds anyway. They go into this like anti-freeze thing after they've been frozen too, so you don't really get a lot from them. You can have it set up so that there's a pretty good chance that you'll gain an additional charge, so you can potentially gain 2. There's some stuff on the board that you can potentially use for this, and you can also have a 15% chance to gain an additional random charge, which is also nice if you're using any other charges in your build. Now, frenzy charges appear around your character very, obviously. It's a green orb that floats around you in a circle, and it makes it very obvious that you have generated a frenzy charge. I could go into a pack of monsters right here, and I could just simply kill a bunch, and you'll see that I instantly gain a frenzy charge, and I can kill another pack, but I don't gain anything. And then I kill a second pack because it's been 4.7 seconds, and I get another charge. Now, as you're running through the map and you're just clearing, you'll notice that you'll get charges relatively effectively with Combat Frenzy. This is something that's pretty easy to do with Combat Frenzy because you just generally get a large amount of charges this way. However, whenever you fight, like I said, bosses or monsters that are harder to freeze or freeze more infrequently, you're going to notice that the Combat Frenzy kind of falls apart at that point. Very good for clear, not so great for bossing. Now, Combat Frenzy can be augmented in other ways to add frenzy charges from other sources. So if you want to get frenzy, like different charges, one thing that you can potentially do is you can utilize the resonance passive, which can turn gain power charges instead of frenzy charges. So this would allow you to turn the frenzy charges that you're gaining from Combat Frenzy into power charges for a different type of ability. Now, what can you potentially use these frenzy charges on? Why are you generating them at all? Like, what's the purpose of the whole entire endeavor? Well, it basically comes down to abilities that specifically use those power charges to get an added bonus. And there are some pretty nice ones in the panel. In fact, if you just grab a skill gem and you just type in the word frenzy into the panel, go to all gems, you're going to notice a bunch of skills come up. There's things like Wind Serpent's Fury, which allows you to consume all frenzy charges to perform a gigantic spear thrust that will knock back enemies. For each frenzy charge consumed, Wind Serpent will follow the spear's wake. Each serpent also damages and knocks back the enemy. Spiral Volley allows you to consume frenzy charges to cause arrows to deal more damage and to chain to other targets. Whirlwind Lance allows you to consume frenzy charges to increase the number of whirlwind stacks, essentially. So consume frenzy charges if possible to create whirlwind with one more than normal of its number stages. Rain of Arrow consumes frenzy charges to get more arrows. Sniper's Mark is a way that you can get frenzy charges in addition to Combat Frenzy, which gives you a frenzy charge whenever you critically hit a target. So it's definitely built around crits. Glacial Lance is really cool. It causes a big explosion when you have a frenzy charge. It's actually really powerful. You also get things like Ice Tip Arrows by expending a Frenzy Charge. You get to bypass the skill's cooldown. Barrage will allow you to attack multiple times with Frenzy Charges, allowing you to get like 3 or 4 or 5 like attacks off at the same time. In fact, the more Frenzy Charges you have, the more attacks you can get. Of course, it still costs mana, and it will burn every bit of the mana that you have, but it will do a large number of attacks at very fast rate. Lightning Spear also consumes a Frenzy Charge if possible to cause the main spear to split into multiple copies on impact, each of them when it bursts. Cull the Weak will actually grant you a frenzy charge, if I remember correctly, but only when you cull monsters. So it's a little bit more difficult to get this on essentially rare and unique monsters. Well, because you don't really cull those very often because the cull percentage is usually pretty low. In fact, if you look at Culling Strike, it specifically states Culling Strike is kill normal enemies if their life is at 35% or below, magic enemies 20% or below, rare monsters 10% or below, and unique monsters 5% or below. These thresholds are checked before the damage hits applied. Explosive Spear gets a really huge, like, 4-way explosion with Frenzy Charges. It's really beautiful. And Disengage is another way that you can potentially build Frenzy Charges using the parry debuff. Overall, there's more ways than that you can potentially spend and use Frenzy Charges, but Frenzy Charges are definitely useful, and so Combat Frenzy becomes useful as well. Unfortunately, due to the way that they've kind of like nerfed the poop out of it, where they prevent you from getting a Frenzy Charge like no more than once every 6 seconds, or even with the Gemling buff, no more than once every 4.7 seconds, it becomes very difficult to utilize Combat Frenzy in a way that helps your character like massively. My personal problem with this is that it really only functions very well on single targets, or sorry, big groups of monsters, and not single target, which causes Combat Frenzy to lose much of its effectiveness when you're actually dealing with bosses or like really tough like elite monsters that happen to be by themselves. Overall, though, it's effective for what it is, which is a very good clear tool to stack frenzy charges while you're clearing. If you have another solution for the single targets, of course, then you can combine them together and you can have 2 different ways or even 3 different ways of generating frenzy charges, which is probably going to be better than one anyway. Um, Freeze, Electrocute, and Pin. You can essentially do any of those, or you can do all of them. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter if you do all of them because you don't get one for each type. Like you don't, if you freeze a target and get a frenzy charge, you can't electrocute the target and then get another frenzy charge because the delay is there. There were some pretty crazy builds back in previous seasons that were utilizing Combat Frenzy, and now I'm not gonna lie, Combat Frenzy was pretty broken for a while, and that's probably why it got nerfed. But we'll see. Maybe they'll unnerf it slightly later in the future. I think that pretty much covers it. Support gem wise, Charge Perfusion is a pretty good one for this. There's really not a lot you can throw in Combat Frenzy that makes it like better as far as support gems. Sometimes with Spirit Gems, there's really not a lot you can put in them to make them better. In fact, like things like charge regulation, I don't think there's anything I would put in there at all, because everything that you put in there is going to cost you support gems or spirit. A lot of the support gems that you put into spirit gems cost spirit. So unless you have something that doesn't cost spirit that you're going to put in there, like Charge Profusion doesn't cost any spirit. So it doesn't cost me any spirit to throw that in there, and that's an absolutely excellent one to throw into Combat Frenzy. But a lot of the other ones that you would throw in there are just going to increase the spirit cost past the original 30 spirit and make it harder for you to like equip that item. And you only have a limited amount of spirit after all anyway, right? It's a finite resource and you want to spend it wisely. Unfortunately, a lot of the times I'm not sure that Combat Frenzy is worth the spend because you might be better off going with a different way of generating your frenzy charges that's more reliable and works on single targets. As always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you enjoy the content, and keep watching.